Hello and welcome to Agents of Nonprofit. My name is Alexander Lapa, and I'm here to speak with everyday superheroes helping nonprofits. Joining me today is Ed Harris to talk about websites. Ed, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Alex. I'm glad to be here.
So, my favorite question to ask people as we begin is, what is your superhero origin story? That is to say, how did you get started working with nonprofits?
Yeah, I'll say right off the bat, I don't feel super comfortable with that superhero label. It's not, I feel too modest for that, but I've been working with nonprofits for 10, 15 years now. This all got started while I was in grad school. I was working on research which was around messaging and storytelling for social change with nonprofits. That grad program wrapped up, and I became clear to me that I wasn't going to move forward with a career in academia. And so my plan B at that point was to go work on websites with nonprofits. I had been building websites on the side for several years at that point, and so it was becoming both a side gig and a clear career pathway for me. And I liked working with nonprofits on social change. So I took a job with a local nonprofit as a content manager for their website. And content wrangler would have been a better job title there. And then that led to a series of website management and website building and communications management and eventually communications director type positions for nonprofits. I worked up into the national nonprofit space with organizations working on advocacy and education work. And then throughout that period, I was working on website projects on the side as well, growing my business, Blue Hills Digital, and went out solo on that business just a couple of years ago. And I'm loving that experience.
It's interesting to see so many people don't want to assume the title of a superhero, but I totally think you're qualified for that role because you really do a great job. You really want to help, and you're in the nonprofit space. So you do qualify, according to me at least, the criteria for a superhero.
And I will say, I think one thing that I experience is giving a particular flavor to the work I do on nonprofit websites is that I have been in that role in-house in a nonprofit organization, working as the point person for a website, whether it's in that website content manager role, kind of making the day-to-day edits on a website, or all the way up to the communications director leadership role, where I've been in-house working with an outside vendor on a website. And now that role is reversed. I am the outside vendor. And so I like to imagine that it is easier for me to get myself inside the mind and the struggles of the person working in-house on a website, and then tailor my approach to work with them and help them kind of solve those problems in a more comprehensive way than you might encounter just working with a web agency.
You see, we just discovered your superpower, to be able to put yourself in the shoes of your client better than most people can.
If that's what we want to call it, then I'll let you go there.
Cool. I want to start off by asking a very odd question, right? We're now in mid-2024. Is there any reason why a nonprofit shouldn't have a website? Can you imagine a situation where any nonprofit in, let's say, North America, at least, we'll stick to that geographic, it doesn't have a website. Is there any reason why they wouldn't?
No, I don't think so. I can't imagine an organization. You can push back if you can think of an example, but I can't imagine an organization at this point in time that wouldn't want just at least a very basic online presence, because this is the world we live in now. Even if your core audience, the audience that perhaps that organization serves, is not primarily online, there will be other, perhaps your donors, local media who might be looking to cover or write something about your organization, who will be looking to, it is the place that we all naturally go to look for information about anything today. And so even if your organization had an audience that was primarily offline and you really didn't need to have a big functioning website to conduct your work, I would still argue that you at least need a single page, just like a business card website, to convey to people that you are a trustworthy, real organization. So I'm sticking with no on that one.
I've seen some organizations, and I can't think of any nonprofits that come to mind, but some businesses, let's say, do or don't have a website, but they do have like a Facebook page. And they might have social media, like the various social medias that we have today. And I don't know, I've seen some that don't have a website. I don't know if a nonprofit would ever want to go that route or not, but I mean, it's technically feasible, but not, of course, not to your advantage because then you're dependent on a Facebook platform and not your own sense of autonomy and whatnot. So, I mean, I would agree with you, but there are ways of avoiding it if you really wanted to avoid it for some reason. But I think that the benefits of having one overall are just severely outweigh any other possibility of not having one or just relying on other platforms or social media.
For sure. Yeah. And I would echo that risk of, what you just described is the obvious alternative for a small, maybe a startup nonprofit or a nonprofit that doesn't have an online audience to just rely on a Facebook page. You come across plenty of local businesses that just rely on their, Google business profile. And sometimes that does the trick, but I'm a big fan of owning your communications channels because of that risk of a social media platform like Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn or whatever it may be, just pulling the rug out from under you. And you all of a sudden you lose that visibility that you were relying on. And so social media platforms are a great supplement, but you can own your website and another company can't take that away from you easily.
Cool. So now that we've established the foundation that you need a website, Mr. and Mrs. Nonprofit, what would be overall, what do you see as overall goals of a website, of a good website? Obviously, we talked earlier or just spoke about a one-pager for basic maybe contact information, but in a typical nonprofit website, what are the features and functionalities you recommend be added to a nonprofit website?
Yeah, I think about these things in two buckets. So there's, the content that you want on that website, what are the pages, what are the content types, and then there's a set of other components of a website that you want to make that sure are there as well. And obviously the content is more variable organization to organization. You want to have content that tells the world who you are and what you do and why, that speaks to your mission, that tells the world why you exist as an organization, what kind of change you want to make in the world, and then how it is that you want to make that change. So what are your services, your offerings, like what do you actually do? And then most importantly, kind of on this train of thought is your theory of change. So why it is that you think that doing what your organization does is going to create the change that you've said you want to make. And I think that's a really important piece that I often see websites where an organization hasn't articulated that publicly. Like I'm sure that it's happening internally in conversations, but putting that content out there about your theory of change, like why your activities will create the change you say you want to make that aligns with your mission, that part feels really important to me. Elsewhere in content, you want to have clear descriptions of what it is that you do. And when you're engaging with your audience, what do you want them to do? Do you want them to sign up for programming? Do you want them to attend an event? Do you want them to make donations? So make all of that clear and make it really, really easy for people to see what it is you want them to do and take those actions. Outside of content, there's a whole bunch of other things that you want to think about. You want to think about security. You want to think about accessibility, making the website easy to use on a mobile device, integrating the website with your other systems like your email newsletter and your online donations and tying through to your donor CRM if you have one, all of those pieces. And so there's a lot to think about when you're putting a website together, especially from scratch. Those are some of the starting places.
I like your theory of change, actually. It isn't often that I do hear that. So I definitely want to underline that because a lot of people jump either to the solution right away, not without properly describing the problem, and some describe the problem and then the solution. But the third one, this theory of change, is actually really good to strengthen your message even more concretely and more succinctly to really prove the value and to be accountable, I think, to a certain extent as well, of the actions you're going to take or you are taking.
For sure, yeah. I'm a big fan of the getting the theory of change onto the website.
So let's say we're starting a website from scratch then, right? You got the content, which we just mentioned, security, accessibility, mobile integrations. Obviously, these depend, the choices that are made for each of these are depend on the budget, the scope, the requirements, the familiarity with certain tools. Do you find, though, the same suspects keep on reappearing? I'm thinking more about the integration side of things, like, of course, CRM hopefully is in the picture somewhere, or an emailer or a marketing tool, or a donation tool or a volunteering tool? Like, are there certain usual suspects that you see appearing from time on a regular basis when building a new website?
I'll admit, I wish it was a smaller list of usual suspects, because every time you start work on a new project and you have to encounter a donor CRM or an email tool that you haven't integrated with before, it presents a new challenge. And sometimes those are the places where a project can become trickiest, and where it becomes challenging to give the client exactly what they wish they could have. So yeah, I see a wide variety of different donor CRMs, online advocacy platforms, emailers, event registration platforms, and that's often one of the more time-consuming and challenging parts of a project. But yeah, there are some usual suspects, like your Mailchimp and your Constant Contact for email, that kind of thing. And Alex, I know you're a Salesforce pro, so that's one of many CRM options out there.
Yeah, I was thinking more about the categories of things as opposed to individual technologies.
Mm.
Like you mentioned, event management, emailer. Which emailer you choose is there's a lot of factors involved, and usually there's a discussion that needs to be had. But the fact that there is an emailer altogether, at least, or it's part of a checklist to ask your clients to say, do you need an emailer, or tell me about your problems, and then you decide backstage whether an emailer would solve those problems or not. But my question, I guess, is more to what I just said, is like a checklist. You normally have a list of questions you're able to ask new clients in order to be able to make recommendations on what other systems does the website need to connect to.
Yeah, great question. For me, most of my projects are not brand new websites from scratch. The majority of the projects that I take on are working with an organization that has had a website for many years, and they're ready to do their latest iteration or improvement or complete overhaul. So I'll say that, but just because typically in those situations, the additional platforms or the technologies are already in place, and the client may or may not be interested in entertaining changes, switching one of those out for something different. The way I start the conversation there is less around a checklist of platforms, but we start with a conversation about the mission and the vision and the theory of change. We look at the audiences that they're trying to engage with. There's often 2 or 3 different audiences for a typical nonprofit, which might be an audience of people that are coming in and using the services or the programming. There might be a donor audience. There might be a sometimes media and journalists is another distinct audience. So we look at those audiences and we think about how are we going to attract them to the website, and then what do we want them to do when they get to the website? And that question of what do we want them to do, that is often the bridge to these more technical questions about platforms and integrations. Because if we want people to come to the website and register for an event or sign up for an email list where they're going to get event updates or something like that, then that gets us into a conversation about, well, there's going to be this page template on the website that has a form on it. How do we build that form? Where does it push that data when somebody hits submit? And then that leads us to the question about, well, what emailer do we use, or what event registration tool do we use? Is the one that you have currently meeting all your needs, or do we want to look at something new? So that's my way into those questions. It starts with audiences, it gets over to the actions that we want those audience members to take, and then we come to the technology. I don't want to put the technology up at the front of that conversation.
Yeah, it's probably the right way to do it anyway. I would also add what are the goals for the redesign? But I'm curious, and even talking about redesigns, because you're right, hopefully most people already have a website to begin with and they need more of an overhaul. Maybe you know the answer to the question, or maybe you just can allude to it. The idea is, how does a nonprofit know when it's time to redesign their website? I mean, obviously the answer could be it doesn't work for them anymore, but are there certain more tangible criteria that they can say, okay, because if this, and this, you guys really should consider overhauling it or redesigning the website, and here's what you can expect as an outcome if we go on that route? Yeah,
that question of how does a nonprofit know when it's time to redesign the website? I think for a lot of nonprofit leaders, board members, executives who maybe aren't in the weeds of communications and marketing, have this general sense that it's every 4 or 5 years, it's time to redesign the website. And I'm not necessarily, I mean, that may be true, but I'm not necessarily a fan of approaching it that way. I think it's time to redesign your website when it's no longer serving your audience and your organizational goals. That's kind of a short and maybe an obvious answer to that question. And in order for you to know when that's happening, that requires for you to be tracking, week to week, month to month, certain measurable goals around how your website is performing. And so you need to have that ongoing performance evaluation happening on your website to be able to tell if your website is kind of falling behind and is actually holding your organization back. I think typically some of those struggles might be that your visitors to your website are no longer able to find their way towards those key actions that you want them to take. So they might, people might be coming to the website, but they're not registering for your events anymore. They're not signing up for your email list in as large volume as you're looking for. Maybe your online events are starting to slow down. Online donations are starting to slow down. And there's a whole variety of different reasons why those things might be happening. And I think as soon as you start to get suspicious that your website is holding you back, or maybe you're even getting feedback from users that the website isn't looking great anymore or is limiting somehow, then that's a great moment to get in contact with a professional or follow some, look up online to try and find some resources around auditing a website, and start digging into questions about, is the website, are there technological barriers that are holding the website back, or are you just you've missed the latest functionality improvements? Technology has moved along and it's time to catch up. One other reason that I often run into, which doesn't fit into the bucket I just described, is if the staff at the nonprofit are struggling to edit content on the website or manage the website or maintain it. That's not an uncommon experience as well. So if a website was developed a few years ago by an agency or a web developer, and the organization has kind of lost touch with that person who developed the website, and so they've been handed a website and they don't really know how to keep it secure and maintained and up to date, that's also often a flag that it's time to find a more sustainable and secure way to manage the site.
Yeah, I agree with all the points you made. I would also add that the design becomes outdated. You wouldn't want to see a website, even if it works for you, even if it does its purpose, but it looks like it was built in 1990 something. It's probably time to overhaul it, just so you don't let it become too stagnant or too stale in terms of just overall design. Because of course the web keeps on evolving with how the things are designed. So that would be one more to add.
For sure. Yeah. The reason I don't sort of prioritize that at the top of the list is that I see so many website redesign projects where really all that gets paid attention to is the visual design. Visual design is important, but it's such a great opportunity. Like redesigning a website or choosing to allocate funding and time and resources to a website overhaul is such a great opportunity to do more than just visual design changes. It's a great opportunity to get into the weeds of like how your website serves your organization, and think about some of those things we mentioned a minute ago about audience and actions and goals and that kind of thing. And it's so easy to just lose all of that if you hire a company to come in and just visually redesign and retheme your website.
Got it. So let's take a walk through the process of doing this and the way that you do it specifically. So, and I'm thinking just the high level steps, for example. So now you've engaged with a client, they're interested in doing a redesign. You kind of figured out what changes you need to make, or at least you're starting the conversation, let's say, is a better way of what changes you want to make. What would be the next 5 or 6 steps, if there's 5 or 6 steps, or maybe more, or maybe less, before you're actually live with that new redesign?
Yeah, it looks very different project to project, but so that the discovery phase comes first, and you've started to allude to that already. So I'm getting up to speed on the organization's mission, the audiences, and what the organization offers, like what the organization does to actually engage with those audiences. So I need to get caught up on all of that, and often that conversation is also helpful for the client or the client team that I'm working with, because they get an opportunity to kind of step back from the details of day-to-day work and really answer some of these questions about, so what is it that it's easy as a staff member at a nonprofit. We're being pulled in a million different directions every day to lose track of what it is that you actually do. If there's 2 or 3 core offerings and you have this theory of change underpinning those, clients often tell me that it's really helpful to have that opportunity to step back during the discovery process and kind of realign on exactly what it is that the website needs to do. So we do that work. At the same time as that discovery work, I'm also doing audit work on the existing website. So I'll crawl the website to generate this giant spreadsheet of all of the URLs on the site right now and categorize all of those URLs into different kinds of content. And so we try to build a really comprehensive picture of what exists currently. Content on the site, we look at the analytics, we look at your organic search profile, and we try and get a picture of how the website is built and how it's working right now, what's working, what isn't. That's important to have because then we move on to the stage of designing the structure and the architecture and the content types for the new website, if we're doing a complete overhaul. And then we need to do this mapping exercise of, so how do we take the content types that we have currently and import or migrate that content into this new structure that we've developed. We do that work, and then that's followed by layering on like the visual design over the top of that. And again, that looks very different for a project where it comes with a whole rebrand as well, versus a project where we're sticking with the existing brand, and the work that we're doing is a little bit more of a kind of stealth behind the scenes rebuild, where we're making the website cleaner and faster and easier to use, but we're not necessarily changing the visual design that much. And then once we've moved through those stages, we're in the place where we're actually migrating content. Often the client takes this opportunity to do content edits at the same time, which can slow things down a little bit, but it's all worth doing. It's a great opportunity to jump into that. And then we're going through our QA, our quality assurance and quality control checks before we launch, and then we go live.
And I'm sure it's hard to ballpark because it varies from client to client and nonprofit to nonprofit. But is there an average or a minimum, maximum amount of time that all of this activity takes place?
Yeah, widely variable. I've worked on projects where on a small site, you can move through all of those stages in as little as 8 weeks. On a larger site, like I have one that just launched a couple of weeks ago, and that one we've been working on for 8 months. So that one from discovery and the kind of initial project design through to launch, that was an 8-month project.
And I'm curious about the data migration. So there's a portion where you have to, or they have to decide whether it's worth to bring things over or just archive them. Like there's an analysis that has to happen to decide what new things should be added, what old things should be deprecated. And I'm curious to know if you have a certain approach to that. Is it, how can you help drive that conversation? Or is there any other tools that you have that you can help them in that process?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think what I often experience in the conversation with a client there is that we catalog all the content that is out there right now. And it's common for a client to see a whole chunk of content that maybe was generated with a particular program or for a particular grant like 5-6 years ago, and they're like, oh, that's not relevant anymore. Like we can just delete that. Like we don't need it on the new site. And that is a perfectly fine decision to make. One of the things that we often end up doing though is looking at data. So I mentioned the giant spreadsheet of URLs, right? This is a common feature of every project. We have this big Google sheet with a row on there for every single URL on the site. And what I'll often do is I'll pull in data from Google Analytics or whatever analytics package is being used that shows, page views and user engagement and maybe a handful of other metrics for each URL. I'll merge that into the same sheet. And then I'll also pull in data from Google Search Console, which is a really powerful free tool for looking at how your website shows up in Google organic search. So we can pull in search impressions and search clicks and even average ranking position from Search Console. And when we do that, and then a client says, oh, that's really old content, we don't need that anymore. Sometimes you'll scroll on over and look at those analytics columns and the search ranking positions, and you realize that actually even though that content doesn't feel relevant anymore, it's attracting a ton of organic search traffic, and people are coming and visiting the website, starting on that old content and then moving through onto newer content. And so you can have these, every now and then you have these aha moments where a client thinks that content is ready to be retired, and actually it's definitely, it would be a bad idea to get rid of it. And then that leads us down the path of looking at refreshing that content instead and finding a way to spruce it up so we don't lose that traffic that's coming in.
Any other factors to consider when building the website or redesigning a website, in the sense of, and I'm leaning toward the idea of setting a certain expectation, maybe more on the design side, but also on the outcome side of, before we actually, or before you actually build this thing, here's the artistic direction we're going in, here is the resource section we're going in, here's how the information architecture is going to work, or the navigation is going to work. Like, are there mechanisms or tools you use to help visualize? Because I'm a big fan of design, right? It's part of what I do with my work. Is I'm a big fan of measure twice or even measure 3 times and cut once. So any time spent in design, I find can really make a big difference, because you can catch a lot of things and fix things and change things before actually building them. And of course, you can make changes after it's built, but their costs are higher. So are there any kind of tools, or what kind of tools do you use to help in that design process, so that when you build it, it's more just a matter of building it out with less chances of correction needed?
Yeah, for sure. And whatever the saying is around, you measure twice, cut once. So I'm probably
the official quote is measure twice, cut once. I actually sometimes use measure thrice, because it's so important. But it's an old construction term as you're building a house. When you want to cut a piece of wood, for example, to make sure that you are cutting the right side and the right length of the wood.
So sure, let's measure twice, cut once. The process that I go through there is, first of all, we build out that. I like to start with the site navigation, just because it gives you that sense of overall architecture. So I'll start on I often use a tool like Miro. One of those kind of big whiteboarding tools that allows you to build different diagrams and visual templates as well. So we'll start with just a whole bunch of boxes on the screen that represent the different content types, the different pages, and we'll look at getting those organized into like a first draft of the navigation. So because it helps us get a sense of the overall hierarchy, like what is the most important content on the site, the most important pages. We want to make sure that all of those show up in the primary navigation and are easy to get to, both from a user experience point of view, and from like thinking about how Google and other search engine crawlers are going to understand the site. The structure of the navigation plays a really big role in signaling what the most important content is. So we'll start with the navigation, then we'll move through into wireframing those key page templates. So a wireframe is really stripped of any kind of visual design, just a structural diagram of what those pages look like. So we'll see the header with the navigation, we'll see maybe a hero section with a big banner, and work through the structure of each of those pages. Once we've aligned on the wireframes and the navigation, we can move over onto actually mocking and providing visual mock-ups of each of those. Some of the most important pages, we'll often do a visual mock-up of each content type on the site. So if we have like an individual event or an individual blog post or a resource, we'll do a mock-up of each of those. Then we move through into actually building those pages out in whatever the CMS or website builder it is that we're using for that project. We'll import some sample content so we can actually see that, and the client can interact with it on Diffy, get some feedback that brings us back to the drawing board, and we need to adjust the way some of the things work. And the beauty of doing all of that slow process is that we then have everything pretty much nailed down before we go through that process of importing 800 blog posts from the past 10 years. And we don't have to go back and change a bunch of stuff. So that's you had asked about tools a little bit. I like working with Miro. The tool selection is, you're constantly getting tempted away to new tools that come on the market, and you can waste a lot of time learning a new tool and trying to jump over to the latest hot thing. So I try and avoid those temptations.
So I would distinguish between a tool and an app in the sense of a tool is just or I'm using at least in the sense of a category of tools, like the fact that you have a whiteboarding tool. Whether it's Miro or Lucid or some other application, that of course changes as technology changes. But the fact is that they all serve the same purpose of being a whiteboard.
Yeah, and one of the things I like about the whiteboarding tools is that they have that flexibility to have, we have part of the tool where we built out the navigation, and then we have somewhere on that same infinite whiteboard, we also have the wireframes, and then somewhere else we can move over and take a look at the page mockups. And so when we're running client meetings, because all of my work is virtual, we have that anchoring experience of that one project's giant whiteboard, and it allows us to kind of gather all the project resources in one place.
You mentioned CMS as well, and WordPress is still the most popular one these days. But does it really matter? Like if you use WordPress or Wix or some other CMS tool to build your website, like I know you might have preferences, but at the end, when it comes to building the website in terms of the goals that you're trying or they're trying to achieve, how much does the specific technology matter?
I think it matters a lot. So your CMS, your content management system, like you said, WordPress is definitely a market leader, and has been for many years. It's very widely supported and has a huge community of people building apps and plugins that integrate with WordPress. And so that's a great option if you want to build a complex website with lots of different functionality, lots of different custom content types. WordPress is where I would steer you for that case. However, Wix and Squarespace are in a different category. They're website builders that offer a fully hosted, kind of fully managed experience. And that is a great option for smaller organizations that maybe have a lower budget overall, who also don't need a terribly complex website, and also don't have the staff expertise or the budget for an outside contractor to maintain that website and keep it secure. One of the risks with WordPress is that it is along with all of the additional functionality and the ability to customize the website almost infinitely, comes an additional maintenance and security overhead. And so WordPress is something that needs to be updated regularly. The WordPress core needs to be updated. Any plugins that you're using also need to be updated, and they need to be tested before you implement those updates. And so that really does bring a lot of additional overhead to managing the website. It's something where you either need somebody that understands and knows WordPress in-house who can manage that work, or you need to be comfortable working with a vendor to take care of the website and do that care and feeding regularly. And that's something that I see a lot of. I'd say even the majority of folks that I connect with for potential website projects are coming from this place of having a WordPress website where they've lost touch with the WordPress developer, or they're having a bad experience with the WordPress developer, and the site is becoming poorly maintained. There's several versions behind on key plugins or WordPress core updates, which introduces all these security vulnerabilities, and that is not a good place to be. You don't want to be in a place where your website could potentially get hacked or go down, or key functionality stop working and you don't know what to do. So that decision is a really important one, and it's something that I cover right at the beginning of projects, like trying to understand whether an organization is a good fit for a more complex CMS like WordPress, or whether we would do better to stick with something that has a lower maintenance overhead like Squarespace or Wix. And I'm agnostic. I will work with, I typically work with Squarespace over Wix just because that's where I have more experience if we're going down the managed platform route, or I would work with WordPress if we're going for something more complex. And just while we're on that topic, a piece of advice that I would offer is to, if you're an organization that is considering a website upgrade or overhaul, try to make sure that you're speaking with some vendors who aren't locked into just one platform. It's important to speak with somebody who can have that conversation with you about which platform is the right one. A lot of agencies are just build Squarespace sites or just build WordPress sites. And so, yeah, try and find an opportunity to weigh which one is better for you.
That's an interesting comment, because I'm not sure I completely agree with that. Like if your website currently is using Squarespace, then it would make sense to find an agency that specializes in Squarespace to be able to continue supporting you and would probably be better at it than someone who knows a little bit of Squarespace, a little bit of WordPress, a little bit of Wix. Versus if you were completely overhauling or, digital transformation type of scenario, then you might want to take a step back and ask yourself the question, does it make sense to continue using Squarespace? After which then, speaking to someone, a strategist at that point or a designer to say, here are your options. Let's evaluate which one works best for you. And then if it ends up being Squarespace again, great. And then you can, still go back to that specific agency to do Squarespace. But at least you've asked yourself the question and validated the answer that it is the right choice based on your particular needs.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And so in the digital transformation example, I stand by, wanting to have that conversation about which platform is the right one for you. I see organizations where Squarespace has become limiting functionality wise, and they make the decision to, and so they might be coming into that conversation with a question of, well, do we stick with Squarespace or do we need something more powerful like WordPress? And that the decision could go either way. But you want to be having that conversation with somebody who can evaluate both options for you instead of, an agency that is just going to try and steer you towards their platform of choice. But in the smaller, in the first example that you offered where, perhaps it's an organization with a Squarespace site and they're looking for the care and feeding, but they want to do that. They already know they want to stay with Squarespace, then absolutely find yourself a contractor or an agency that is an expert in that technology. But any time that you have an inkling where solving whatever the problem is might involve moving away from your platform, or at least entertaining the idea of moving away from that platform, you want to have that conversation with somebody that understands the options and isn't locked into one technology.
I'm curious to know your perspective about AI as it's becoming more and more capable. I can't imagine, I know it can write code, for example. I've never seen it, or I haven't seen a use case where it writes or designs websites entirely. Obviously, it can do images and it can do certain content, but the structure of websites, I don't think maybe it can, I don't know yet. But what is your perception about AI in terms of today and tomorrow? Like, is there going to be a point where someone can just ask an AI to build a website and with the right prompt, it would work? Or hopefully it doesn't happen too soon for you, but I mean, I'm just curious to know, what impact, or maybe even on a more positive spin is how can you leverage AI, or how can they leverage AI to build a better website in conjunction with what you do?
Yeah, I'll be honest, and I'll try not to be a downer on how AI is at this moment in time. I'm not using AI a great deal in my work currently. There are specific instances like within my own work where AI is certainly kind of speeding things up a little bit, particularly when it comes to specific like cumbersome coding tasks or data migration tasks. There's definitely use cases where AI just introduces efficiencies there, speeds my work up. But I'm not seeing any viable cases where AI could generate a quality website for you at this moment in time. Emphasis on the quality there. Like a lot of the website vendors, Squarespace and Wix are kind of rushing to introduce AI into their products the same way everybody else, it seems like, is doing at the moment. So you can get into Squarespace and there's a little AI button, there's little AI prompts in there, and you can, put a prompt in and get it to generate some content for you to kind of build out your website more quickly. And I'm a real skeptic on that. I want to see people conversation. I think redesigning or rebuilding a website is a great opportunity for you and your team to pause and be thoughtful about exactly what it is you need your website to do and how it communicates your organization out into the world. And I'm not sure why you would want to delegate that task to AI at this moment in time. I want to see real people communicating. And I think on the receiving end, that is what we want as well. Like if I visited an organization's website where I was considering making a donation to support their work, like I don't want to see, I want to be confident that what I'm hearing is the voice of the staff that are dedicated to that mission and doing that work. I don't want to feel like I'm reading content that is generated by AI. And I think we can often tell when that's happening. So I'm slow moving on AI at this point.
Yeah, I guess the future will be written soon. We'll find out. This has been awesome. Ed, thank you so much. I was wondering if you could share with people how they can get in touch with you if they have follow-up questions about websites.
Sure. Yeah, my solo consultancy, the business name is Blue Hills Digital. So that's the best page to find me. Just type that into your search engine of choice or go to bluehillsdigital.com and you'll find me there. There's a contact form, there's a scheduler for a free consultation if anyone's interested in talking more.
Awesome. Ed, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. I appreciate the opportunity.
All right, that's it for today. I'm Alexander Lapa, and I hope you join me again in the next Agents of Nonprofit.